Hey guys, today we're going to talk about resources, and particularly the resources that are important to humans. I'm sure you've heard of resources before, and you've probably heard of them put in two different categories, renewable and non-renewable. But if you look at this picture, it'll actually give you a better description for a resource, and that's that, yes, there are resources that are more renewable than others, but really there's a continuum. And if you look at this picture, if you're not sure what a continuum is, it'll give you a great example. You notice the arrows. The arrows go from left to right, and it's one continuous line. And this line, you can imagine it like any line you've had in math. It continues on infinitely, and it's got points on the line. And why is that important? Well, a continuum means that certain things could fall on that continuum in different locations. And that's really the important thing with renewable and non-renewable resources. The determination between what's renewable and non-renewable is really the measure of our life. And in the middle, we have these resources that are kind of renewable, but at the same time, we can use them up. And we call these resources sustainable resources. So we're going to talk about those three types here for a moment. First and foremost, renewable resources are those resources that humans can use and that they become readily available again. You notice the listing over here is sunlight, wind energy, wave energy, and geothermal. If we think about all four of these resources, they're almost immediately returned to us. If you wear black clothing and you go out on a hot sunny day, the black clothing will absorb that sun and it will heat you up. However, you can't use all of the energy from sun. It's constantly coming. And so you can't dampen it by having more people out in black clothing. There's simply going to continue to be more sunlight. And whenever the sun does stop, well, quite frankly, it's going to be bad news for our race anyways. Wind energy is similar to that. I'm sure you've experienced high winds before, and no matter how many people put together, the winds are still there. You might be able to huddle together to keep the wind from affecting you, but that wind continues to blow. And what we found is that wind will always blow, and there are certain regions that are more windy than other regions. Around our part of Indiana, we tend to see a lot of wind turbines, and that's because wind energy here is viable. We have fairly strong winds year-round. Wave energy isn't something we would use. However, if you lived by the beach, then you would notice that the waves are constant. And if you could capture that energy from the waves, capturing it won't stop it from happening. You're not going to calm down the ocean. Waves are generated by a combination of wind driving small waves and then, of course, tide energy caused by the moon's gravitational pull. Geothermal energy is the energy of the earth or the heat that's there. Again, all of these are very readily available. On the opposite side of renewable is non-renewable. And this is on the exact opposite of the continuum. The ones listed here, crude oil, natural gas, coal, all three of those are fossil fuels, generated over millions of years through dead but not decayed plant and animal matter. If we had a different time frame than the human lifespan, non-renewable resources might be able to renew, and they certainly will, but it's going to take millions of years. And for us, that's not an option. You really need a resource that's going to renew much faster than that. The other ones, copper, aluminum, and metals, they really aren't going to renew. We're a set amount of those particular resources, and that's because they're metal elements. Metal elements were formed in the fusion of a star, and some of the metals we even have on our planet were formed in a supernova, suggesting that our star is a second-generation star. Comparing left to right, renewable to non-renewable, the continuum looks vast and separate. But really, you can put points on here, and that's where the sustainable ones come into play. If we take a look at the sustainable resources, first off, we have fresh water. And the thing about fresh water is that, yes, it is easily renewed. We constantly have rain, which can constantly give us fresh water. But there have been multiple examples of us overusing that. So we have to be careful not to use too much fresh water. That's why a lot of places during the summer will put restrictions on how much you can water your lawn. We have a lot of different forests, and if you plant a tree, it will grow, and you can regrow a forest. But if you use them too quickly, they're gone. So forest products have to be protected, but they can regrow. Same thing with agricultural crops. We can replant them, so long as we take care of the fourth sustainable resource, and that's soil. All four of those resources, fresh water, forest, agriculture, and soil, are things that we can have forever if we're wise about it. So as for a definition of resources, renewable resource can be produced or replaced in a healthy ecosystem, and non-renewable resources because of natural processes, cannot replenish them without a reasonable amount of time. And really reasonable should be changed to long amount of time. So if we take a look here, this is a really, really good clump of soil. It's very dark, it's full of organic matter, and that really adds a lot of nutrient to it. And soil resources are important to us for agriculture growing crops. Soil in its basic is made of sand, silt, and clay, and then organic matter that's mixed into it. And plants will use the organic matter and the nutrients that are in there as those extra minerals that they need to go through the process of photosynthesis. And of course, soil resource allows us to have all of those vegetables that we like to eat. And even if you don't like vegetables and you're more of a meat eater, the meat you ate vegetables. So you still need soil resources. Here's a picture of a forest. If you look, there's a lot of old growth trees. They're very tall, growing very straight, have good leaf structure. This forest is quite frankly a resource. There are some countries like Brazil that's their primary resource, is all the trees that they have. And so if you manage this resource like soil, it can continue to be there forever, planting as many trees as you are cutting down and protecting some of that forest so you don't use it all up. And of course, we're going to build buildings with wood, and we're going to build furniture with wood, so it's definitely an important part of our life. This is an old-time well that you probably have never seen, but it's a bucket. And in essence, a well is pretty much a hole in the ground. That hole extends below the water table, and then it gets stoned in. And so they can drop this bucket down into the well, and because it's below the water table, it has some water resting in the bottom. Today, we would drill wells like this. We wouldn't dig a hole. This truck would come in. It's going to dig very, very deep wells. My mother lives out in the country down in Tennessee, and her well is over 300 feet deep, and it was drilled by one of these trucks. It's a very small pipe. You're going to drop an electric pump down there, and it'll pump the water up. Again, the goal of a well is to get below the water table. Water is an important resource for us. As humans, we can't go very long without it before we'll die. And so what you've seen is that humans, our population, will constantly clump near water sources. Some water from groundwater comes out of springs. It's a natural spring flowing out of a rock face. And it's really nice and clean water because it's moving through the ground and through these rocks. A lot of the stuff gets pulled out of it. It'll probably have some dissolved minerals in it, but spring water is overall pretty good water for you. Sites like this, if protected, can supply fresh water for a small group of people, or there are some companies that use springs like this to fill bottled water and make money. This particular image is of a water collecting facility in Lake Michigan. And Lake Michigan, being fresh water, is an important source of drinking water for the surrounding communities. They'll have these collection centers where they draw up the water, they'll process it to clean out some of that particulate matter and make sure it's clean, and then they'll drink that water, use it for showers and everything else we use water for. Absolutely critical to our life is water, and we think of it most in this case, where it's simply coming out of the faucet, at our fingertips. But it wasn't always this way. There are still people in the world who travel miles a day to get water, and they have to, because they cannot live without it. If we use it sustainably, because it's a sustainable resource, it's not going to go anywhere. Sunlight is one of those very renewable resources. This house here has a whole bunch of photovoltaic cells on top of it. We call those solar panels when you put them together. And they're generating electricity from the sun. This isn't the only way you can generate electricity from the sun, but it's definitely one viable way. And so by taking sunlight and turning it into electricity, we're capturing that resource. This particular image, that's a coal mine. One of the key practices today to get coal is what they call mountaintop removal. If you look over here, you'll see where the mountain used to be. That it was at least a hill of some kind. And what they've done is literally cleared off the top, blown the mountain apart, and they're collecting the coal that's underneath there. This is absolutely devastating to the ecosystem around it, but we use coal, in at least this part of the United States, very heavily for our electric use. But if you look at the trucks down at the bottom, you can really get the scale of what's been happening here. Literally, they removed the top of the mountain. Petroleum is another natural resource. I'm showing you an off-sea ocean drilling well here. Of course, they can drill for petroleum on land as well, and you see it in this form. Air is an important resource. And if you look at these two pictures, I think they contrast very well. It's a resource that we have that is sustainable, but that we can definitely pollute. On the right, we have a clear factory environment. And that environment is discharging a lot of volatile organic compounds and pollutants into the air. If you compare that on to the left, which air would you like to breathe? And this resource is one we definitely have to protect and use responsibly. If you look at the one on the left, it's clearly a country scene. There isn't a lot of pollution. But if the people there are driving cars, living in houses, buying electronics, the cost of those things was the picture on the right. If air quality is damaged in one location, air doesn't stay there. it will move. And we've seen multiple cases of air quality going down and it causing an effect at the surrounding area.